Bob McCoskrie joining me now. Bob, kia ora.
Good morning, Andrew. Actually, you're a part of a bigger crowd. I just checked the numbers on our platforms. It's 50,000 plus in
50,000
24
plus.
hours. So
Look at that.
it has gone viral. Funny you say about the cramming, though, Andrew, because I had an international speaker for the forum. I won't name which year or who because you might identify them, but I took them to Hobbiton, as I take all the international speakers to, and they did the same thing. They crammed a watch of Lord of the Rings the week before they came over just so they could get some relevance out of Hobbiton, and then went to Hobbiton and absolutely loved it. And I think probably watched as many episodes as Kathy Jenke has watched.
Wow.
Because Kathy Jenke, when she was producing me when I was on breakfast at Rhema, she would often say, "Oh, I'm off for the weekend. I'm going to watch 4 episodes of Lord of the Rings," which sounded like a snooze fest to me. But anyway, sorry, different topic.
No, different topic. Although, Bob, I would encourage you, you don't need to watch any of the movies to enjoy a ginger ale at the Green Dragon. One day, maybe. One day, maybe. This particular conversation, though, has been a long time coming. What, like 8 years since this controversy started? For those people who haven't got as long a memories as you, what's the basic frame of it? Why was this controversial at the time?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point that you raise because it was 8 years ago. In fact, it came up in my memories on Facebook. 8 years ago at the weekend, Israel Folau simply put out a response to the referendum that they are having in Australia at the time called a plebiscite on same-sex marriage. Should they redefine marriage? And he said in this tweet, I love and respect all people, but I do not support same-sex marriage. He got pilloried for that. He got watched, he got warned, and he was basically monitored for his social posts from then on. Roll on a couple of years, and then he puts out some opposition to a birth certificates bill in Tasmania, which means that you can choose the sex on your birth certificate. And then, of course, that image where he talks about that we're all sinners and that we're going to hell. And some people got very upset by that.
Basically a quote from the Bible, which became an infamous tweet, and he lost his career over it. I mean, going back to the first one, though, that was particularly interesting because Australia's having a referendum on a topic. A referenda says, look, you're allowed to have different opinions on it. That's what a referenda is. And yet he couldn't have a different opinion because he was a professional rugby player.
Well, that's the problem. And of course, the interesting thing is that, you know, we hear a lot about diversity and inclusivity, but unfortunately it tends to be only on certain views. And one of the interesting quotes that came out of the interview that I did, so basically they'd been approached by a number of what you'd call mainstream media outlets wanting to have this first interview. They simply didn't trust any of the media simply because of a very one-sided reporting that had happened over that tumultuous period. And you hear about just how tumultuous it was in the interview. Fortunately, I just kept on gently banging on the door and saying, hey, look, any chance, how about telling your side of the story? Because nobody has ever heard it. And they were gracious enough to sit down with me. They trusted us. They valued our work. And we were able to get this, you know, it's about a 48 minute, I think, interview. And you do see a side of them and you hear their side of the story, which many people just haven't heard. The media never reported that side. And I think, you know, it's important. There's a great scripture that says, you know, you hear one side of the argument, which you think is true until you hear the other side of the argument. And, you know, I think we need to do that on so much stuff we see in the public domain.
It is perhaps telling. And great interview, by the way, and very personal indeed, talking about the impact not just on their career, but how that impacted their marriage and the way they related together and what that did to their faith. Lots of really good stuff in there. But it is quite telling that it took so long to tell the story that almost at the beginning of the conversation, you need to go, what was the story with that again? Because to an extent, the rest of the mainstream media, as you say, have moved on. You kind of need to have a prequel, to go back to your Hobbit metaphor, to be able to understand the story in that regard. It's taken them a while to be comfortable enough to tell the story.
Well, I think that you've summed up just how traumatic that whole period was. I mean, you've got to understand that he simply posts something on his personal social media, and as a result, he effectively lost his contract. they were hunkered down in their apartment. They couldn't go out. The paparazzi were after them. The media were after them. Maria Folau shares how, even just going on the plane was scary, just walking through public places. So, I mean, I think it was hugely traumatic. I think we underestimate that. And I think the other interesting thing, Andrew, and look, we had scheduled the release. And it's interesting that it has sort of just come after we've gone through the trauma of watching the assassination of Charlie Kirk as well. And so there's this kind of connection about, do we have the freedom to speak, and do we have the freedom to believe even when people disagree with us? And it's been a really important cultural conversation that I think we're having. And a lot of people have said, interesting timing with your release of Israel and Maria Folau interview, because it's added on. Sure, they haven't suffered the traumatic consequences that Charlie Kirk suffered, obviously.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a reminder that if you do stand with integrity for your faith, then you will struggle with it. And just that word integrity, Andrew, is interesting, because the unit that was from Rugby Australia that was dealing with Israel and Maria Folau, and you'll remember this from the interview, the interesting thing is that the integrity unit was the one that basically pilloried them for not pulling the post down and not being nice. And Maria makes the statement that she believed that it was Israel that actually acted with the most integrity because he stayed true to his values. And so, it was just interesting when you throw certain words around like inclusivity, diversity, and integrity.
Sometimes they mean the opposite of what they are supposed to mean. I mean, yes, of course, a character assassination, very different than actual assassination, but of course there are parallels there. A couple of questions, and I know that you've thrown this out to the audience, and you might get 50,000 plus responses to this. What question would you have asked? And I'm taking a risk here, Bob, because I say I've seen about half the interview. Maybe this is a great question you asked in the second half. It's something that I thought at the time that it was posted, and I certainly admired the post that was made, the stance that was taken. But a question that I had was, yes, it's true, but is it wise? Because I think sometimes as Christians we can be very quick to say, yes, but this is true. But sometimes wisdom and discernment and saying, hey, this is what I mean, but could somebody misinterpret what I mean and weaponize it against me? Look, I know Israel in particular, he'd prayed a prayer and said, God, test my faith, and maybe this was an answer to prayer. But I suppose that would have been my question. Yes, it's true, but is it wise? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to tease your audience a little bit, Andrew, and I'm going to say, watch the interview and find out how he responds, because I put that direct question to both of them. And say, look, it is confronting, and people say that, the tone's not right. We need to be nicer with the gospel. So that's one of the questions that people wanted me to ask him. The other question was, would they do it again? And once again, their response, it's interesting, very interesting, and you need to watch it for that. I'm really teasing here, aren't I?
Exactly. Stay tuned for details. Check it out.
I don't want to misrepresent them. And once again, and I think it's what the media never did during the whole coverage of the thing, gave the chance for Israel and Maria to present their side and put context to the whole thing. And of course, we also asked an interesting question, which you possibly haven't got to yet, that people wanted me to ask them, and it's what would they do if one of their children said that they were LGBT of some sort. And once again, I thought, very excellent response. Once again, you got to watch the
video.
You got to go to familyfirst.nz. It's plastered across our homepage.
Exactly.
Familyfirst.nz. 50,000 have watched it. If you haven't watched it yet, go and watch it.
You're almost in the minority if you haven't watched it yet.
That's exactly.
And hey, I would encourage people to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Lots of great content there. Just one final question for you, Bob, because you've just come out of the Forum on the Family. This was, in some ways, the hero piece of that. Lots of great speakers, but a lot of people went, oh, gosh, I really want to hear what they have to say on this. The theme of the Forum was a cultural tipping point. For you on this one, if it happened again today, would there be the same reaction? Would there be the same pile-on from Sport Australia and the media? Or have we started to have that cultural tipping point where actually perhaps there wouldn't be so much of a pile-on and there may be a different result? What's your thoughts?
Well, that's another question that I put to Israel and Maria. You should have done the interview. Andrew.
Well, no.
Far better.
Okay. Well, in which case, they give an answer to that in the interview, and I encourage people to check that out on the Family First website and the YouTube channel, of course. But what would your answer be? What do you think the response would be now that the culture has slightly changed over the last 5-6 years?
Well, I think we're already seeing it. For example, we saw the Manly Seven refuse to wear the Pride armband and stood up despite the death threats and the possible sanctions. There were 7 of them, so that made it a little bit easier.
Yep.
But even closer to home, for example, Adi Savia, playing in the rugby and for the All Blacks, he has been uncompromising about his faith. We saw examples of it in the Olympics. We saw a surfer who was dismounting off a wave and did literally stands pointing to the sky as his board's over here. And it's an amazing photo. A lot of people are expressing their faith. And I think, well, I'm sad. It's kind of significant to say, Andrew, that maybe our next conference is not a significant cultural tipping point, but it's a turning point now. Okay. To use the phrase of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
We're seeing, there is a change. And I think if you look online and look at some of the commentary, you'll see people saying, yeah, I do want to take a stand for my faith. And my understanding is that Turning Point in the USA has just exploded in terms of followers. Charlie Kirk's social media channels have just exploded. I tell you, more people have watched his material and been exposed to some of the truths that he was talking about, marriage, family, all those types of things. So, there's a tipping point, there's a cultural point. Watch this space.
Yeah, and hey, watch the video as well, and I'm certainly going to be checking out the second half of that.
Yeah, I'll test you next time.
Exactly. There will be a quiz. Having said that, though, I think it is significant that the bravery of Israel and Maria, honestly, because, he was the one that posted the meme, but she was there with them. She was one of the few that stood by him, that their bravery has perhaps resulted in a bit of a tipping point, that actually there is more freedom now for sports people in Australia because of the stance that they took. So good on them for following the prompting of God. Good on you for finally getting that interview. You can check it out at familyfirst.org.nz. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.